Dan, if I want to explore the idea that naturalism or physicalism, the idea that there's no supernatural factors in the world, if I want to explore that idea, how can the techniques and methodologies of philosophy, and you're a great philosopher, help me to explore that?
Well, I think that philosophers are more experts on questions than answers. My sort of bumper sticker slogan is that philosophy is what you have to do until you know what the right questions are. And that means that philosophy is always somewhat informal. It's not structured. There's no rules exactly for how to do it. You're always sort of thrashing about trying to figure out, are these the right questions or are these the right questions? And once you get clear about what a question is, it's a good question, then you go off and try to answer it. And that's not philosophy. That's whatever it is. It's physics or psychology or history or jurisprudence.
You say your job is over when you got the questions?
That's right. No, I think when I think that's the history of the field too. That it all starts out as philosophy back in Aristotle's day, and as various questions got clear, then they shelved off like an amoeba. Now we create physics, we create mathematics. It's an interesting historical fact that the American Philosophical Society, not the American Philosophical Association, that's for philosophers. The American Philosophical Society is basically a physics society. It was founded by Ben Franklin, among others. It's in Philadelphia. And back in those days, even physics was part of philosophy. So that's one of the triumphs. To
understand our world.
And so I don't think it demeans philosophy at all to say that what philosophy is good at is getting clear about the questions. And that's the help. That's the help that we can give you, is helping you see why certain questions, which are very tempting, are going to mislead you more than help you.
Okay, you're absolutely right. So let's look at physicalism or naturalism, that only the physical is real and anything non-physical, non-material is imaginary. So what are the kinds of questions that would steer me in the wrong direction, and what are the kinds of questions that might be neutral to get an appropriate answer?
Well, if you start with your own experience and say, well, here I am, I know that I exist, I have my own experiences. Now, what are they made of? What made of exactly? Well, these experiences. Don't be sure that that's the right way of thinking about it, because that sort of first-person perspective will probably take you down the primrose path to dualism, and dualism is a mess. Now, might it be true? I suppose it might, but if you can resolutely adopt a third-person perspective on yourself and say, well, here's this guy, puzzled, asking himself questions. How can a living body ask itself questions? And by the way, that's a good question, because we never, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never paid myself for making myself lunch. That seems like a sort of stupid thing to do, does it not?
Right.
I've never lent myself money. Why? Because I'm me. I mean, but then why do we talk to ourselves? We already know what we're going to say. Why do we do this? Why do we ask ourselves questions? And the answer has to be, we're not as unified as we think we are. One part of us is asking another part of us a question. And that other person says, I'm glad you asked me that question. There is information exchange. There's getting things together that weren't naturally together. Our very asking of the questions tells us, the fact that we do it tells us something about our disunity. Because it makes sense to do it. We learn a lot by asking ourselves questions.
Yeah. We make progress.
Yeah. Socrates was puzzled by that. Here we are, we're sitting around trying to figure out what the definition of, say, justice is. What are we doing? If we don't know, why are we asking? We're asking the wrong people. If we do know, why aren't we asking? We already know. It's got to be that we know it in one way and don't know it in another way. And so philosophy is good at reflecting on what people are doing when they ask themselves questions and saying, Why are they doing that? Is this a good way to proceed? Sometimes it is.
Let's take that same technique, because that's terrific applying to ourselves, which is one of the sources of dualism. I think the other source of non-physical ideas about the world come from the external world, particularly in today's world from cosmology, study of the universe, or study of biological systems, and basically the so-called argument from design, that there's design out there. So how can philosophy approach the external world and help us to dissect the good questions from the bad questions?
Well, I think that you raised the question of design in the world and the argument from design, and I think that until Darwin came along, that was a very respectable argument for the existence of God, because the design that is observable in nature is just exquisite, and every day we learn how brilliant it is. We learn more details about how fantastically, beautifully designed things are. Where'd all that design come from? Now, here's where philosophy can help in a very simple, straightforward way and say, look, you've got to make a distinction between the product and the process. The product is absolutely brilliant. The process is not brilliant. The process is mechanical, foresightless, purposeless. It doesn't have any purpose, but it generates things that have purposes. And that's hard to understand. I could give you quotes from really intelligent people just in the last few years who don't make this distinction or don't see it. They don't, look, if something's designed, there's got to be a designer. So that must mean that the biological world isn't designed. That what Darwin showed us is that we could live without design. We could live without teleology. No, I don't think that's what Darwin showed us. I think what Darwin showed us is how you can get design without a designer.
That there really is design.
Right, in the sense that the parts mesh beautifully. There's reasons for them. In fact, people have a hard time with this idea of reasons. I say, look, everywhere we look in nature, we see reasons. There's reasons why this part of the body works this way. There's reasons why we have this enzyme and not that enzyme. There's reasons everywhere we look. Whose reasons are they? They're not the organism's reasons. They're natural selection's reasons. They're what I call free-floating rationales. And getting our head around that idea is very difficult. A lot of people, even trained philosophers, resist the idea of reasons that aren't anybody's. But I think it's a very important idea.
It's no secret to you, I'm sure, that many scientists, including some famous ones, would pretty much dismiss all philosophy as, at best, a neutral waste of time, and at worst, a hindrance.
Yeah, I get that all the time, and it's a little bit deserved sometimes. One scientist has said that philosophy is to science what pigeons are to statues. One of my favorite rudenesses. But I then take all the more delight in watching the scientists when they find they have to address a philosophical question. They think, this is a piece of cake. And what do they end up doing? They end up reinventing all the mistakes of Aristotle and Plato and Hume and Kant and Descartes and Mill. And then they realize, if they reflect at all on this, that there's really no such thing as philosophy-free science. You can get your philosophy from the seat of your pants, the way a lot of them do, or you can get a little help from somebody who's specializing in this, or you can try to become a philosopher yourself. But you're going to have a philosophical position whether you like it or not. Now,
because even what I said, that it's all a waste of time, is a philosophical position by itself.
That is, and a risky one, a particularly risky one. They said, but you philosophers, you spend so much time on the history. You go poring over all these old texts. Why do you do that? We scientists, we don't do this. We learn a little bit about Newton, a little bit about Curie, and a little bit about Darwin, then we get on with it. Why are you poring over the past that way? And the answer is, look, the mistakes those people made. Philosophy is, in many regards, a history of mistakes, really tempting mistakes, really, really tempting mistakes that very smart people are apt to be tempted by. If you don't go over those and see why they're mistakes and why they're tempting, you're just going to reinvent them. And so I take a certain, perhaps ignoble delight in watching those scientists who have sort of contempt for philosophy fall on their faces when they try to say something a bit more about, say, what consciousness is or isn't. And then they begin to realize it's not quite as easy as they thought. I think that's where philosophers have a role. And more of the people in the field who are working on the tough questions appreciate this. And that's what's really gratifying, is to see that though they recognize that they're getting help from some of us, we're clarifying issues, we're raising questions that they hadn't thought to raise, we're helping to articulate the reasons for some of the things that they feel in their bones. And that's a worthwhile contribution.
And it becomes clear. It's a clarity process.
It's a way of helping them see the woods for the trees very often.
What would be an example of a superficial scientific philosophy that later turns out to be problematic and has to be refined professionally?
My favorite is what I call Cartesian materialism. Now, Cartesian materialism is the idea, Descartes, we're going to do scientists, but he's all wrong about that dualism stuff. It's all just the brain. It's all just the brain. So that's the materialism part. But then the Cartesian part is where they say, but there has to be a place where it all comes together. And that's what I call the Cartesian Theater. It's material, it's physical, it's in the brain, but it's the headquarters within the headquarters. Now, if I put it that way, most people working in the field say, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. Well, then why are you asking this question, and why are you asking that question? Why are you saying this? If you're not presupposing that there's this place where it all comes together, what is the point of your questions? And I could give you, with some time, lots of examples of people who say they're not Cartesian materialists, but then it's very hard to see what the heck they think they're doing, because their views really demand that there be this place farther upstream where it all comes together. And they have to start getting out of that.
So even though they would not be dualists in any way, shape, or form, they're totally materials, they're totally brain, but they still maintain this.
They're making the other Cartesian mistake. They're still thinking. Descartes, had said it was the pineal gland, which I like to call the fax machine of the soul. It's this place. Everything has to go through. This is a little turnstile. It's a bottleneck. You have to get through the pineal gland to get to the soul. Well, everybody scoffs at that quite correctly. Descartes that was foolish. Well, so where does it come together? If you still think it comes together, not in the pineal gland, but in one place in the cortex, you're making the same mistake. And it's actually hard to see how to say the things that you want to say about consciousness without falling into that mistake. It takes some real mental gymnastics to think your way into other ways of thinking about these issues.
So really, philosophy, in terms of being able to clarify and particularize questions for science, is very important in the process of physicalism and understanding the material world, not just in eliminating a dualistic approach.
I think that's right. I think that one of the most interesting reactions I've had to my book on Consciousness Explained is that a lot of scientists have come up to me and said, I thought I was a good materialist until I wrote your book. I began to realize how much I have to give up if I'm going to be a good materialist. And they said, now the attractions of dualism are beginning to be clearer to me. And that is progress, because their sort of flat-footed materialism wasn't going to work. And they were just grafting materialism onto second-rate Cartesian ideas. And so now they realize it's trickier than that, isn't it? Yeah. Well, that's progress.